good afternoon to everyone present over here. Today we are going to see the topic of objectives and levels of disasters in the disaster management. Actually, we have seen about what is disaster and what are the types of disasters are there and what are the types of vulnerability are there. And we have also seen about the Indian continental disasters occurs, what are the major disasters has been occurred in India, everything we have seen. So, as a recollection of that, the disasters which has been occurred in India, mostly in the northeastern region, hilly regions, southern regions, everywhere the disasters will occur frequently because of the climatic changes. Now we can able to see about the objectives of the disaster management. The disaster management refers to the policies, programs, administrative actions, and operations undertaken to address the natural or the man-made disasters through the preparedness, mitigations, response, as well as the recovery stage. So the main aim of the disaster management is to have the some sort of the plans, some sort of the disaster plans in order to uh, address the natural as well as the man-made disasters through the preparedness, mitigations, response, as well as the recovery phases. These four are the phases of your disasters. Although the actions taken to address the specific disaster vary depending on the hazard, the following four objectives of disaster management apply to every situation: reduce the damages and deaths, reduce the personal sufferings, speed of the recovery, and protect the victims. These four disasters objectives will be applied in each and every situation. So once a disaster has been occurred, there will be the loss of life and loss of property, loss of environmental, everything will be there. So we have to reduce the disasters. How we can able to reduce the disasters through the preparedness stages, or otherwise the mitigation phase, or otherwise the response and the recovery phase. We can able to reduce, or we can able to overcome from that particular disaster. So these objectives, that is reduce the damages as well as the death, reduce the personal sufferings, speed of recovery, and protecting of the victims can be made as an objective for the disaster management in each and every situations. Now let us see about the scope of the disaster management. The term disaster management encompasses the complete realm of the disaster related activities. If it is of a disaster management, the entire disaster related activities will be taken into account in this particular term. Traditionally, people tend to think of the disaster management only in terms of post-disaster actions. Most of the peoples will be looking after that post-disaster actions will be taken into account of the disaster management. That is by taking the account of relief as well as the reconstruction officials. But in the pre-disaster activities, also much more involved there in the disaster activities. So that is of preparedness stage. Nowadays, the pre-preparedness stages has been implemented after the Bhuj earthquake. As I have already said in the last class, after the Bhuj earthquake, the Disaster Management Act has been implemented, and we are getting off the pre-disaster management acts. So, the disaster management covers a much broader scope, and many modern disaster managers may find themselves far more involved in the pre-disaster activities than in the post-disaster responses. So this is because many persons who work in the development field or who plan the routine economy, urban and regional or agriculture development projects have disaster management responsibilities. So each and every people who are working in these cases, they will have the disaster management responsibility. In order for that post disaster, before the post disaster activities, many people will be involving in the pre disaster activities. For example, the housing specialist planning a low-income housing project in the disaster-prone area have an opportunity to mitigate the impact of a future disaster if the houses incorporated disaster-resistant construction technology. So, in a particular period, if a particular people who is going to build a particular house in the disaster-prone area, he or she can able to build that particular building with the disaster resistance modern construction technologies. So many construction technologies has been there for disaster resistant activities. So the people will be looking after that disaster resistant construction technologies. In the same manner, the agriculture development projects must be planned in such a way that help to stem the environmental degradation and thus lowers the farmers' vulnerability to losses from the droughts, floods, cyclones, or other natural hazards. So the agriculture development projects must be planned that will help to help the environmental degradations as well as the lower the farmers' vulnerability. In fact, in dealing with the natural hazards, the vast majority of the natural management activities are related to the development projects. Only a small portions are related to the emergency purposes. Similarly, the emergency assistance in the field of the disaster management will also be taken into account of the scope of the disasters. The refugee field of the disaster management is highly specialized and requires not only many development skills but also broader awareness of the political, legal, as well as the humanitarian issues. In the areas, the refugees, people who are coming from the other countries to our countries, those people will be calling as refugee people. So in the refugee area, not only the disaster management act will be taken into account, they will have the broader awareness of the political issues or the legal problems or the humanitarian issues. So those skills will also be required for a particular people in the highly specialist area. So as I already said, the major disasters of the known history of India. So these are all some of the major histories. So the disasters been occurred in the year by year, day by day. Many areas has been affected with the disasters and the fatalities also been getting of increased. So as we already seen this, the natural disasters which has been occurred in almost all parts of the India. Similarly, the earthquake risk zones we also see in the last class itself. So most of the northeastern trade and as well as some of the northern Asia, the earthquake risk zone is much more higher. The damages are much more higher. Similarly, this is a map showing the wind and the cyclone zones of India. Because of the cyclone, the areas of the eastern region has been affected much than the western region, and we will see that tsunami affected of Indian territory. So the tsunami is the secondary cause of the earthquake, and it affects mainly the southern regions of the India, especially the regions of Andhra Pradesh, Pondicherry, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala, and Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So these areas are much affected because of the tsunami by the year of 2004. So these regions has been getting of damages, buildings are getting damages, environmental has been getting damages, people social economics has also got damaged, everything has been there. So the loss of the lives or loss of the property or loss of the environmental areas, or loss of degradations of forests or everything has been occurred in this particular tsunami. So after this, the disaster management has been taken into account in a keen manner by the Indian government. So let us see some of the glimpses of the tsunami. So this is about the damages which has been occurred after that tsunami. So we can able to see here the buildings has got damaged, the road surfaces has got damaged, and the boats which has to be in the seashore area. It has came to the roadside, and we can able to see the buildings have got damages because of the tsunami. And here the electrical pole lines has been got damages because of the tsunami. Because of these electrical pole damages, the electrical accidents may be taken forward in the particular area. So we can able to characterize your natural disaster, that is characteristics of natural disasters, by this following manner, that is from the low to high to low, and low to high, and sudden to slow. We can able to have these following categories, that is high predictability or low predictability. Similarly, high initially lithically or low initially lithically, and scope of the disaster will be of high or low, and similarly onset delay will be from slow to the sudden or sudden to the slow. If everything will be of characteristic, that is predictability, initiality, scope, as well as the onset delay. For example, the earthquakes and cyclones, we can have the onset delay. We can split as an onset delay. Earthquake will be of the sudden disaster, whereas cyclone will be of the slow disaster. We can able to predict the particular cyclone where it has been occurred, when it is going to hit the particular area. So everything can be predictable. So that is of low predictable and high predictability is there. So if, for example, high predictability means, for example, if tomorrow is the earthquake cyclones has been going to occur, it is of a high predictability. If it has been coming for the next week, after 7 days, the cyclones has been going to affect it, it is of low predictability. Similarly, floods, famine, everything can be there. So from the initial or low or high or low or similarly sudden or slow onset delay of these natural disasters are of the characteristics of the natural disaster. That is predictability, initial ethically, scope of the disasters, as well as the onset delay are the characteristics of your natural disasters. The last centuries have added a new ecological dimensions to the definitions of the disasters. We then have a newer man-made disasters on our hands, which include the chemical disasters like Bhopal gas tragedy in the year of 1984, oil spills, air, water, and soil pollutions. So these are all the man-made disasters which has been occurred in the recent days. And developing countries have been facing the burnt more than the developed ones because they have less physical as well as the financial resources. So because of this natural disaster, that is especially by the Bhopal gas tragedy, many people has been got affected because of the gas has been released in the particular region. So the developing country, India is a developing country, and we are facing a much more problem since we don't have the physical as well as the financial resource. So India is the second largest populated country with 1.2 billion people so that have large share of the all types of the disasters. So if the disasters been occurred in India, most of the peoples are going to get affected. So these things has been to be taken into account in case of your disaster management. Hence, the disaster management has been framed. That is, Disaster Management Act has been framed after the earthquakes of Bhuj 2001. After the earthquake of Bhuj, the government has taken much more initiatives to have the pre-preparedness phases of your disasters. It is virtually impossible to prevent most of the disasters. So the earthquake we can't be able to prevent. Similarly, the cyclones we can't able to prevent. Similarly, the floods we can't able to prevent. Those things has been occurred natural landslides we can't able to prevent. Avalanches we can't not able to prevent. These every natural disasters we can't able to prevent. Nevertheless, we can forestall or alleviate the many of the worst effect by anticipating them and by being prepared at disasters. The greatest number of disasters occur in those countries that are already most adversely affected by the ill health and poor economic conditions. So many disasters has been occurred in the India and which is not able to prevent in a particular region. Disaster is a collective responsibility requiring coordinated response from various agencies and almost all parts of the societies. So the government agencies will be looking after into the disaster preparedness with their respect to urban development, agriculture and flood, health, energy and power supply. So with respect to these areas, the government agencies will be looking after the disaster management acts. Disaster produce several types of the trauma. The health consequences fall into various categories like death, disease, disabilities, distress, dislocation, or disorganization. Similarly, starvation, water and power supply, unemployment, road communications will be getting damages because of the disasters. So these are all the much more affecting factors or much more affecting areas where because of the disasters. So, in case if you are looking after the physical, psychological, and socio-economic and disaster trauma, in case physical trauma, we can able to classify as fractures, burns, injuries, infections, poisoning. Everything will be looking after the physical activities and psychological activities. Many people will be getting of depressed, griefs, anger, guilt, apathy, fears, the burnout or syndrome, the bizarre behavior, suicide, peer interference, anxiety, alcohol abuse, stress reactions, everything will be taken into a physical, psychological account. So psychological account will affect the entire man because of the disaster. And similarly, socio-economical problem. The economical distortions will be there. Unemployment will be there. Disorganization will be there. And many people will be have homelessness. So many people will not have their own shelter after the disaster. So these are all the some of the disaster trauma because of the physical, psychological, as well as the social, economical trauma because of the particular disasters. The approaches to overcome these disasters are rescue, relief, rehabilitations, and as well as the follow-up. We have to overcome from the particular disasters because of these approaches. That is rescue action to be taken, relief action to be taken, rehabilitation to be taken, follow-up action to be taken. And the National Disaster Management Plan has been taken into account in these kinds of situations. So this plan, NDMP, National Disaster Management Plan, provides a framework and direction to the government agencies for all phases of the disaster management cycles. The NDMP is a dynamic document in the sense that it will be periodically improved, keeping up with the global best practices and knowledge bases in the disaster management. And in the accordance with the provisions of the Disaster Management Act 2005, the guidance given in the national policies on the disaster management plan and establish the national practices. relevant agencies, either it is of a central agencies or otherwise state agencies, will be carrying out the disaster management activities in different phases in disaster affected areas depending upon the type and the scale of the disasters. So the National Disaster Management Plan will be looking after all kinds of activities which has been taken into account of Disaster Management Act. So the Disaster Management Act, you can able to see it has been formed by the year of 2005 after the huge earthquake. The objectives of the National Disaster Management Act is to improve the understanding of the disaster risk, hazards, and vulnerability, and to strengthen the disaster risk governance at all the levels from the local to the center, and to invest in the disaster risk reductions for the resilience through the structural as well as the non-structural and as well as the financial measures, and to enhance the disaster preparedness for the effective response, and to have a promote build back better in the recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction activities, and to prevent the disasters and to achieve the substantial reductions of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, health, and assets. These are all the objectives of the National Disaster Management Plan. And other objectives involving in the NDMP, that is National Disaster Management Plan, is to increase the resilience and to prevent the emergence of the new disaster risk and reduce the existing risk, and to promote the implementations of the integrated and inclusive economy, structural, legal, social, health, cultural, and educational policies measures, and to prevent and to reduce the hazard exposures and vulnerabilities to the disasters, and to empower both the local authorities as well as the communities as a partners to reduce and manage the disaster risk, and to strengthen the scientific and the technical capabilities in all the aspects of the disaster management. The other disaster management objectives are it will have the capacity development in all the levels of the disasters to effectively respond to the multiple hazards and for the community-based disaster management, and to provide the clarity on the roles and responsibilities of various ministries who are all involved in the disaster management activities. Many ministries and many departments will be involved in various aspects, that is preparedness phase, mitigation phase, and the post-disaster phase. Their roles and responsibilities will be have some sort of the clarity because of this management plan, and to promote the cultural of the disaster risk prevention and mitigations at all the levels, and also to facilitate the mainstreaming of the disaster management concerns in the development planning and process. So the various levels of the disasters will be taken into account from the L0, L1, and L2 and L3. So these phases is nothing but L1, L2, L3, and L4 is nothing but it is from the local bodies to the higher levels. For example, L0 phase is from the local organizations of the within the district. L1 is the district level, L2 is the state level, and L3 is the national level. So whereas each and every one will be interlinked. For example, the local authorities will be seeking help from the district level, and the district level will be seeking help from the state level agencies, and the state level authorities will be seeking help from the national level authorities based upon the disasters. If the disasters is more, the state level will be getting of help from the national level authorities. So each and every ministries and each and every department will be looking after the Disaster Management Act. Further, the Disaster Management Act does not have any provisions for notifying any disasters as a national calamity or the national disasters. So, the disaster, even though the Disaster Management Act has been mentioned in the year of 2005, that disasters cannot be notify any sort of the disasters as a national calamity or the national disasters. So this is about some of the glimpses of your disasters as well as the Disaster Management Act, which has been formed in the year of 2005, and we have seen about the scopes as well as the objectives of the Disaster Management Act. Thank you very much.